A police officer was bound inside her crashing helicopter, left to die in the freezing wilderness. But she wasn't alone. 4 newborn shepherd pups shivered in the wreckage beside her. The man who caused it all believed the blizzard would bury every trace of his crime, until a Navy SEAL and his retired K-9 heard a strange cry in the storm that changed everything. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story moves your heart, please subscribe for more. Morning light struggled to exist, swallowed by a roaring blizzard that turned Denver's outskirts into a white, shifting void. Inside a solitary log cabin tucked against the lower ridges of the Rockies, Ethan Miller sat in a heavy silence, broken only by the wind's violent scraping along the wooden walls. Ethan, 37, wore the look of a man sculpted by years of controlled chaos. Broad shoulders, a square jaw traced with dark stubble, short black hair grown slightly longer than military regulation, and gray eyes sharpened by a lifetime of assessing threats before thoughts. His thick forearms rested on his knees, hands loosely clasped, yet his posture carried the tension of someone who didn't fully remember how to relax. His mind worked in quiet spirals, memories of desert heat, the shock waves of blasts, the ghosts of teammates he couldn't save. Retirement from the SEALs had given him distance, but not peace. At his feet lay Shadow, his retired K-9 partner, a full-grown black German shepherd with a sturdy weather-tested frame. Shadow's coat, a deep charcoal with silver streaks around the muzzle, shone with health, despite his age. He was 8 years old, seasoned, disciplined, a dog who had run through gunfire with Ethan without hesitation. Even now, in a warm cabin far from war, Shadow slept lightly, as if expecting orders. The storm outside thickened, morning light fading into white noise. Ethan rubbed the bridge of his nose and reminded himself he had come here to reset, to unlearn the instinct to scan windows for snipers or listen for footsteps behind walls. Rest was supposed to be simple. It wasn't. That was when Shadow's head snapped up. His ears shot forward, his body turned to stone, and a low rumble vibrated in his throat. Not a bark, a warning. Ethan froze. Shadow didn't make that sound for wind or wildlife. That growl came from the part of the dog still wired for war. "Talk to me, boy," Ethan whispered, rising slowly. Shadow padded toward the door, stiff-tailed, nose twitching, then let out a short, sharp bark, urgent, decisive. Ethan grabbed his snow gear, pulled on a thick tactical jacket worn at the elbows, and stepped into the storm with Shadow ahead of him. The morning was supposed to be bright, but the blizzard devoured the sun entirely. Everything was white, swirling, and bitter. The cold cut across Ethan's face with blade-like precision. He leaned forward into the wind, following Shadow's determined march. The dog kept stopping, listening, and pressing onward, ears high, nostrils flaring. Something was out there, something wrong. Ethan couldn't hear anything beyond the storm's roar, but Shadow had never failed him before. They trudged through drifts reaching Ethan's knees, the snow muffling even their footsteps. After several grueling minutes, Shadow halted at the edge of a steep slope, growling louder now. Ethan followed his gaze and saw it, a faint flicker of orange against the overwhelming white, a fire, small, failing, but real. Ethan's pulse tightened. No fire burned by accident in a storm like this. He descended the ridge, half sliding, half crawling, until the shape came into view. A mangled police helicopter smashed into the snowpack, its tail severed, rotor blades bent like broken ribs. Steam hissed from torn seams. The impact had been brutal. Ethan felt adrenaline slam into his bloodstream. Crashes weren't rare in winter, but the condition of the aircraft, this wasn't a soft landing gone wrong. This was violence. Inside the shattered cockpit, he saw her, a woman, tall, lean, athletic, the kind of build that belonged to runners and tactical responders. She had medium-length honey-brown hair matted with ice, fair skin now drained to a near-ghostly pallor, and a strong jawline softened by exhaustion and cold. Officer Sarah Jenkins, Denver PD K-9 Unit. Her uniform was torn, her badge still barely clinging to her chest. Her wrists were cuffed to the metal frame of the seat, deliberately. Her lips were blue, breath thin. Someone had wanted her restrained, even as the helicopter went down. The cruelty of it punched Ethan in the gut. He hated seeing innocents hurt. He hated seeing injustice. But what he hated most, what triggered something tight and molten in him, was seeing someone left to die helplessly. He pulled himself into the wreckage, cutting through her twisted harness with practiced precision. Sarah moaned weakly when he touched her shoulder, head lolling. She was alive, but the cold had sunk deep into her bones. Behind her, a faint squeak reached Ethan's ears, a tiny, desperate sound. He swung the flashlight. In a cracked canine transport crate, 4 shepherd puppies huddled together, tiny bodies trembling uncontrollably, fur wet and clumped with frost, little eyes dull with shock. No older than 5 weeks, barely clinging to warmth, barely clinging to life. One pup tried to lift its head but collapsed again. A knot formed in Ethan's chest. He was not a man who cried, but this pulled at something untouched since before the war. "Okay," he whispered, voice steadying itself. "I've got you. All of you." He unlocked Sarah's cuffs using a cold-stiffened multi-tool, then wrapped her in his own heavy coat, tucking her head against his chest. With his free arm, he scooped the puppies against his thermal shirt, zipping his jacket tight around them until he felt their faint heartbeats flutter against him. They needed warmth immediately, or they wouldn't make it. Shadow barked once, urging him back. Ethan nodded, tightening his grip. The wind fought him, every gust trying to push him off the slope, every step sinking into snow that swallowed his boots. Sarah's weight pulled at his shoulder, the pup squirmed weakly, and his breath tore white into the bitter air. But Ethan kept going. He had carried wounded men through firefights worse than this. He wasn't losing anyone today. After what felt like an hour compressed into minutes, the dark shape of his cabin emerged from the swirling white. Ethan slammed the door open, heat spilling out to meet them. He staggered inside with Sarah and the 4 tiny survivors pressed against his chest. The door shut behind them, sealing out the storm and sealing it in a chance at life. The cabin's warmth spread slowly, battling the icy residue of the storm that clung to every surface. Yet nothing thawed as slowly as Sarah Jenkins herself. Ethan worked with quiet precision, tending to her injuries with the competence of someone who had done this far too many times. He removed the frozen remains of her uniform, dried her skin with heated towels, wrapped her ribs, and disinfected the cut at her temple. The bruises along her jawline were fresh, harsh, and shaped unmistakably like fingerprints, signs of a struggle she hadn't chosen. The earlier shadows around her eyes, formed by exhaustion and hypothermia, softened as her pulse steadied under Ethan's firm, measured care. Sarah was naturally tall and slender, built for endurance, with skin that usually held a warm ivory glow now paling beneath trauma. Her honey-brown hair, tangled from the crash, fell in damp strands around her shoulders. Even unconscious, she carried the posture of someone who had spent years training her body to obey under pressure. Ethan watched her faint breaths, counting them in the silence between gusts of wind outside, and felt the familiar tug of responsibility anchor to his chest. A weight he didn't resent, but one he recognized as dangerous. He had lost too many people before. He refused to lose another. The 4 puppies, now nestled in a thick blanket near the stove, whimpered softly. Their tiny bodies twitched with returning life. Shadow lay protectively beside them, his large frame radiating heat as he kept a vigilant watch. Ethan glanced at the pups, small, helpless, hardly more than 4 bundles of wet fur, and wondered what kind of monster had looked at them and felt nothing. Hours passed before Sarah finally opened her eyes. Confusion hit her first, where she was, how she was alive, then fear. Her gaze darted wildly across the cabin until she saw the pups, all 4, alive. Sarah pushed herself upright despite the pain, her breath hitching. "The babies," she whispered, voice cracking as she reached for them with trembling fingers. When she saw them breathing, her shoulders collapsed in relief and she covered her face, letting out a broken sob that made Ethan look away, giving her the privacy of grief. He recognized the sound, rage and relief braided together. It was the sound of someone who had been forced to imagine the worst. When she finally spoke again, her voice was fragile but controlled. "I thought I lost them. I thought he killed them too." Ethan pulled a chair closer to the couch where he had laid her. "They're safe. You're safe." Sarah swallowed. For now, Ethan caught the shift in her tone, the dread blooming again. The part of the story she hadn't told yet. He waited. She stared at the dancing fire, her hands clenching the blanket around her. "Lieutenant Chris Dalton," she began, voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "My commanding officer, my mentor, the man the department calls a hero." She said the last word like it tasted rotten. Sarah continued, her breaths coming unevenly. "He runs a smuggling operation, Military rifles, modified tactical gear, high-end ammunition, uses police transport flights. No one questions a K-9 unit helicopter manifest. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. He had seen corruption before, seen how men in positions of trust twisted power until it strangled the innocent. He found out you knew, Ethan said quietly. Sarah nodded, her fingers digging into her knees. I didn't even mean to find it. I just noticed irregular fuel logs, impossible flight paths. I thought it was a clerical mistake. Her lips trembled as she forced the memory into words. I traced one of the flight tags. It led to a warehouse outside Aurora, unmarked, guarded, and his car was parked behind it. The fire cracked sharply, punctuating her confession. I pulled records, hard drives, export logs, everything. I was going to report it to Internal Affairs after the transport run this morning. Her throat tightened. But he knew. God, he knew before I even stepped onto that helicopter. She wiped her face, eyelids fluttering. He smiled at me. He strapped the pups into the crate himself. He asked if I slept well. I thought he was being kind. Her voice darkened. But once we were in the air, he shut off the comms. He hit me, hard. I didn't even have time to call for help. She shuddered. He demanded the evidence. I said I didn't have it. He didn't believe me. He cuffed me to the seat, beat me until I blacked out, and then he forced the emergency descent. Ethan felt something old and lethal rise in him, a storm far colder than the one raging outside, but he kept his expression neutral. Sarah needed steadiness, not rage. How did you hide the evidence? He asked. Sarah lifted a shaking hand and pointed toward the smallest pup, a tiny shepherd with a light brown stripe across its muzzle. Blue, she whispered. I stitched the micro SD card into the lining of his collar. Dalton tore apart my jacket, my vest, my bags. But he never checked them. To him, they were just dogs. Just equipment. Her voice hardened. He didn't know he was looking straight at the one thing that could destroy him. Ethan nodded slowly, weighing the significance. A sliver of data hidden on a trembling puppy. One man willing to kill everyone on board to protect his empire. One woman who refused to surrender the truth, even when it meant dying with it. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his temples. If Dalton staged this crash, he said, he won't assume you're dead. He'll come back to confirm it. Sarah looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. He won't stop. He'll bring others, men loyal to him. He'll make it look like a rescue attempt if anyone questions. Ethan's gaze shifted toward the window, where the storm still screamed. Then he'll have to get through me. Sarah studied him carefully. She wasn't used to relying on others. Her jaw tightened as she tried to sit straighter, though her ribs protested. I don't want anyone else getting hurt because of me, she whispered. Ethan met her eyes, steady, determined, shaped by a lifetime of carrying others through fire. You didn't choose this, but you're not facing it alone. A soft whine interrupted them. The pups stirred, tiny bodies rolling toward warmth. Shadow lifted his head, eyes glowing in the firelight as he nudged the weakest pup back into the nest. Sarah exhaled shakily at the sight, tears softening what anger had made sharp. Exhaustion finally claimed her, pulling her back down onto the pillows. Ethan adjusted the blanket over her and checked her pulse one more time, steadying, stronger. Outside, the storm wailed against the cabin. Inside, 5 fragile lives breathed in a pocket of stolen warmth. Ethan stood guard, the fire reflected in his cold gray eyes, already planning for what came next. Because he knew one truth with absolute certainty. Someone had left Sarah Jenkins to die, and he was going to make damn sure she didn't. The storm thinned by morning, but the world outside the cabin remained a white expanse of shifting drifts and muffled sound. Ethan stood at the frostbitten window, studying the vague outline of snow-laden trees while his mind raced through possible approaches of an enemy he still didn't fully know. Behind him, the cabin crackled with the steady heat of the fire. Beside it, Sarah Jenkins slept restlessly on the couch, her breaths uneven and shallow from pain. She looked stronger than the night before, yet still far from safe. Her tall, slender frame rested under layers of blankets, though her bruised cheek and the stitched wound on her temple told the truth her calm face tried to hide. Blue, the smallest of the puppies with a caramel stripe on his muzzle, lay curled on her chest, rising and falling with each breath she took, unaware he carried the single piece of evidence powerful enough to topple a corrupt empire. Shadow remained at Ethan's side like a dark sentinel, his thick black-gray coat dusted with the snow still clinging to him from an early patrol outside. He had returned with a low growl, something Ethan had learned never to ignore. The dog had sensed movement in the forest, not animals, not the wind, something human. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, a habit born during his deployments, something he did when tension began coiling under his skin. Training had carved threat assessment into his bones, and everything inside him now pointed toward one conclusion. Dalton would send men before coming himself, men loyal enough to kill a fellow officer, men desperate enough to clean his tracks. As if summoned by his thoughts, Sarah stirred awake, blinking blearily at the ceiling. Her honey-brown hair, now dry, fanned across the pillow, and she winced lightly as she pushed herself up. Ethan moved beside her, steadying her shoulder without a word. "Morning," she whispered, voice rough but present. "Storm died down?" "Enough for trouble to move," he replied. Sarah's expression tightened, dread flickering in her hazel eyes. "He'll come. He can't leave the helicopter sitting out there, not with me missing, not with evidence unaccounted for." Ethan nodded slowly. Shadow picked up movement in the tree line, too steady to be wildlife, too cautious to be hikers. "Dalton's men," Sarah whispered. The words tasted like ash. Ethan left her with a warm drink and stepped outside, checking the perimeter with practiced efficiency. The cold stung his face, but he barely noticed. His focus sharpened with every breath. The woods were quiet, too quiet. By the time he returned to the cabin, Sarah had settled at the table, wrapped in a thick sweater Ethan had forced her into. Despite her pain, she sat with straight shoulders and eyes that burned with a mix of fear and defiance. Ethan admired that steel in her. It reminded him of soldiers who refused to let nightmares claim their last ounce of courage. "We need a plan," Sarah said quietly. "I need to get Blue and the others somewhere safe, and you—" She faltered, unsure how to include him in the equation. Ethan leaned against the table, crossing his arms. "You're not going anywhere until you can stand without shaking, and even then, I'm not letting you walk into a firing line." Sarah bristled. "I'm not your soldier." "No," Ethan said, meeting her gaze evenly. "But you're my responsibility until this ends." She looked away, shaking her head slightly. "Dalton won't come quietly. You don't know what he's capable of." Ethan's jaw flexed. "I know exactly what men like him are capable of." Sarah paused at that, truly paused, and something shifted in her eyes, an understanding that Ethan carried scars she hadn't asked about yet, but instinctively recognized. Before she could speak, a sudden sound cut through the quiet cabin, a sound too mechanical, too deliberate, too out of place in the storm-hushed woods. The low hum of engines. Ethan and Shadow were at the door in seconds. Sarah hobbled to the window, bracing herself on the wall. Through the swirling snow, shapes emerged. Snowmobiles. 2, then 3. Black helmets, dark-tinted visors. Men in heavy tactical winter gear, bulky and insulated, with orange striping along the sleeves. Their movements efficient, coordinated. A man in the lead dismounted first. Taller than the others, burly, with the stiff confidence of someone who lived by giving orders. When he pulled off his helmet, Ethan glimpsed a square face, close-cropped brown hair, and a scar running from his left eyebrow down to his cheek. A jagged line, the kind earned in a bar fight or worse. His eyes were pale and sharp, scanning the cabin with the cold detachment of a predator. Ethan recognized the type instantly. Someone used to violence, someone who liked it. Sarah inhaled sharply. "That's Mason Trent," she whispered, clutching the edge of the windowsill. "Dalton's fixer. He handles the messy work." Ethan didn't need the elaboration. Mason Trent, mid-40s, built like a linebacker gone feral, wore brutality in the tight set of his jaw. His thick neck and heavy shoulders told of weight training, but his movements were too fluid for a simple gym brute. This was a man trained to hurt others quickly and without hesitation. The other 2 men with him, both mid-30s, leaner, removed their helmets as well. One had straw blonde hair and a pointed beard patch under his lip, a face too narrow and stretched with nervous energy. The other, dark-haired and heavier, carried himself with the stiffness of someone trying to hide fear beneath bravado, secondary muscle, disposable in Mason's eyes. Sarah ducked away from the window. "If Mason's here, Dalton knows I'm alive." Ethan's expression hardened. "It also means we don't have much time." They moved quickly, Ethan checking weapon placements, Sarah gathering the pups and placing them into a reinforced wooden crate lined with blankets. Blue whimpered softly as she lifted him, sensing her fear. "I won't let him touch you," she whispered fiercely to the tiny pup. brushing his muzzle with her thumb before securing the latch. Ethan watched her gently. She carried maternal instincts he hadn't expected. Soft hands, protective voice. It contrasted sharply with the hardened bruise along her jaw, but maybe that was what strength truly was. Gentleness surviving inside chaos. Outside, footsteps crunched in the snow. Mason's voice boomed, deep and grating. "Cabin owner, step out. We're conducting a search and rescue sweep. Missing officer and downed helicopter." Ethan exhaled slowly, centering himself. He opened a drawer, retrieving a radio jammer, a compact device he kept for emergencies. He switched it on. "They won't call Dalton from your yard," he murmured. Sarah watched him, breath trembling. "What are you going to do?" Ethan looked at her, calm and unshakable. "Whatever I have to." The knock on the door came hard and impatient. Ethan positioned himself to the side, shadow low and ready, the storm screaming behind Mason's boots. And as Ethan reached for the handle, he had only one clear thought. No one who walked into this cabin today was going to harm the woman he had carried through the blizzard. The day crawled by beneath a sky the color of steel, thick with the lingering breath of the storm. Though the snowfall had eased, the world outside Ethan's cabin remained buried under deep drifts, a silent prison of white where sound traveled strangely far. Ethan stayed close to the windows, watching the tree line with the still focus of a man who understood exactly how predators moved through wilderness. Quietly, patiently, with purpose. Sarah, still pale but more alert, sat at the table, wrapped in the thick sweater Ethan had insisted she wear. Her tall, slender frame trembled now and then, when her bruised ribs protested movement, but her hazel eyes stayed sharp as she scrolled through Ethan's secured tablet, the satlink pulling regional news in slow, stuttering bursts. When the headline finally loaded, she froze, her lips parted in disbelief. "He really did it," she whispered. Ethan crossed the room, leaning over her shoulder. The screen displayed Lieutenant Chris Dalton, standing before a bank of microphones, his perfectly pressed uniform immaculate, his expression a calculated blend of grief and authority. His golden brown hair was combed neatly. His blue eyes that once convinced entire departments he was a model officer, held a practiced sorrow. The chyron below read, "Denver officer missing, possible mental break, suspected involvement in colleague's death." Sarah's breath caught. "He framed me, officially." The sick weight of betrayal tightened across her bruised ribs. She stared at Dalton's image, tall, charismatic, with a clean-cut jaw and the confident stance of a man who had fooled an entire city. His spotless record, his charming smile, his calculated kindness, all armor shielding a monster. The video continued. Dalton spoke with slow, emotion-laced cadence, the tone of a man begging the public for help. "Officer Jenkins was under immense emotional strain. We're concerned she may be involved in the tragic loss of Officer Reese Turner." Sarah flinched. Reese Turner, her colleague, early 30s, dark-skinned with a dimpled smile and the easy kindness of someone who remembered everyone's birthday. He had gone missing a week ago while investigating something suspicious near the aviation hangar. Sarah had feared the truth. Now she knew it. Dalton killed him. And now he was using Turner's death to bury her. "He's erasing me," Sarah whispered, voice cracking. "He's making sure no one even looks for the truth." Ethan placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "That's why he's coming. He needs to finish the story." Sarah swallowed hard, her fingers trembling around the tablet. "Then we need to survive long enough to change the ending." Ethan nodded once. "And we will." The day dragged on in tense silence. Ethan prepared the cabin the way a SEAL prepared a forward position. Every blind spot accounted for, every tool repurposed as a weapon, every exit mapped in his mind. Shadow stayed glued to Ethan's side, his dark fur rising along his spine, as if anticipating violence. The puppies slept in their crate, unaware of the danger circling ever closer. Sarah spent most of her time in the hidden cellar, an insulated room beneath the floorboards, originally designed as a storm shelter. The narrow space held shelves of supplies, wool blankets, and enough water to last weeks. Ethan had built it years before, never expecting it to become a refuge for a hunted woman and 4 shivering pups. As evening fell, a strange stillness settled over the forest, the kind of quiet that didn't belong in nature. Ethan felt it before he heard anything, a predator's silence. Then from the distance, the low rumble of multiple snowmobiles broke the hush. Sarah stiffened. "That's him." Ethan moved quickly. Into the cellar, now! Sarah grabbed the crate of puppies, Blue whining softly as she lifted him. Shadow followed, body low and tense. Ethan opened the trap door, helping Sarah descend the wooden steps. He handed her a pistol, not to fight, but to reassure her. "Stay quiet," he whispered. She nodded, her hazel eyes filled with fear and something fiercer, refusal to die. Ethan lowered the trap door, sliding the rug over it. Then he stepped into the darkest corner of the cabin, becoming indistinguishable from the shadows. Outside, engines roared closer, 6 snowmobiles slicing through the frozen silence. Voices followed, heavy boots, confident strides. And then, Dalton. His voice was unmistakable, smooth, warm, almost friendly, like a neighbor checking on you after a storm. "This is Lieutenant Chris Dalton with Denver PD. We're conducting a rescue operation. Anyone inside, open up." A fist pounded the door. Ethan didn't move. He listened, counted footsteps. 6 men total. One voice, Dalton's, commanding, manipulative. "Break it," Dalton ordered, tone still maddeningly calm. The crash of a heavy ram hit the reinforced door. The second strike splintered wood. The third blew it inward. Men stormed inside, flashlights slicing across the room. "Clear left, clear right. No visual on Jenkins." Dalton stepped in behind them, tall and imposing in his winter tactical gear, his breath forming calm clouds in the air. "She's here," he murmured. "I can feel it." His men fanned out. That's when Ethan moved, silent, precise, lethal. He struck the first man with the butt of his rifle, dropping him instantly. The second spun around, too slow. Ethan swept his legs out, sending him crashing into the table. 2 bodies hit the floor within 5 seconds. "Contact!" one of the remaining men shouted. Gunfire erupted, shredding the cabin walls, filling the air with splinters. Ethan ducked behind the stone fireplace, returning only enough fire to push them back, not kill. He needed them alive until backup arrived, but they were too many, and they had automatic weapons. The cabin shook under the assault. Then, a light brighter than fire, whiter than snow, a roaring wind overhead. A helicopter descended. Massive, federal, unmistakably military. Floodlights poured through the windows, bathing the cabin in blinding white. A voice boomed through a speaker. "NCIS, all weapons down! Hands in the air!" The gunfire stopped instantly. The forest exploded with motion. Armed federal agents in white Arctic gear swarming from the tree line. Behind them came heavy steps. Quick reaction force from the nearby military base. Dalton spun toward the window, face draining of color. No, this wasn't supposed to." "Chris Dalton," a woman's cold, steady voice rang out. A figure stepped through the broken doorway. Special Agent Valerie Hart, early 40s, sharp-featured, with short black hair streaked with silver, eyes that had seen enough lies to recognize them instantly. Her tailored NCIS jacket contrasted with the snow clinging to her boots. "You're under arrest for corruption, weapons trafficking, and attempted murder." Agents tackled Dalton's men to the ground. Hart motioned, and 2 operatives cuffed Dalton as he struggled, mouth twisting in outrage. "You don't understand," he snarled. "She's dangerous. She's unstable." Agent Hart's voice was ice. "Save it. We found your warehouse." Dalton froze. She added, "And your other victims." Ethan stepped from the shadows, lowering his weapon. Relief hit him like a physical blow. It was over. Agent Hart swept the room with a sharp gaze. "Where's Officer Jenkins?" Ethan walked to the hidden trap door and lifted it. Sarah emerged slowly, clutching the crate with 4 trembling puppies, and Shadow pressed to her side. The agents parted respectfully as she stepped into the room. Blue squeaked softly. Dalton went still, recognizing the pup he had overlooked. Sarah met his eyes, her voice steady despite the tremor in her ribs. "This is the evidence you missed." Dalton's face collapsed, and Sarah Jenkins, broken, bruised, but unshaken, finally won. Spring arrived quietly in Denver, slipping between the funnel breaths of winter, like a promise the city had nearly forgotten how to believe in. Snowmelt ran through gutter edges, trees stretched out new leaves and soft greens, and the Rockies glowed with warm light each morning, their cold crowns thawing beneath a gentler sky. Months had passed since the night the hunters came for Sarah Jenkins. Months since the cabin, the cellar, the blinding floodlights of federal rescue. Enough time for wounds to fade into thin, pale lines. Marks of battles survived rather than tragedies endured. But inside Sarah, not everything softened. some parts sharpened. Strength did not return the way she expected. It didn't come roaring back like a wave, but rebuilt itself grain by grain, like sediment settling into something unbreakable. Now she stood taller, her posture firmer, her presence commanding in a way she had never imagined before. Her honey-brown hair, now cut to shoulder length for practicality, framed a face still carrying faint echoes of bruises long healed. Her skin had regained its warm ivory tone, though stress carved sharper definition into her cheekbones. Today she wore the slate-gray suit of a federal investigator, something she had earned through fire, not favor. Lead investigator Sarah Jenkins, Federal Anti-Corruption Task Force, a title built from courage and scars, and she wielded it with purpose. Each day over the past months, Sarah had torn apart the remnants of Dalton's network, tracking down smugglers, confronting officers who had looked the other way, submitting reports thick with evidence that had once rested hidden inside Blue's tiny collar. The city owed its cleansing to her, but she didn't work alone. 4 German Shepherd pups, no longer helpless furballs, now bounded through the training field with the unstoppable force of youth. Blue, once the smallest, now carried himself with the quiet intensity of a future patrol dog, long legs, sharp ears, and a stripe of caramel fur that had darkened into a proud mark along his muzzle. Ember, the fiery one, had a reddish hue along her coat and a defiant spark in her amber eyes. Scout, the quick thinker, had a narrower face, always tilting his head, as if deciphering every sound in the world. And River moved with fluid, effortless grace, his deep gray-black coat rippling like water. Watching over them was Shadow, broad, dark, and slightly grayer now, though his muscular build and disciplined posture made him every bit the seasoned sentinel he had always been. He walked among the pups like a strict uncle, occasionally nudging one back into place or issuing a low growl when rough play went too far. The trainers loved him, the pups adored him, and Sarah trusted him with her entire heart. But today wasn't about training. The air at Denver International Airport shimmered with afternoon sun, painting the glass walls in gold. Travelers flowed in waves, suitcases rolling, announcements echoing, children laughing. It felt almost surreal to Sarah, standing in the center of such normalcy after everything she had survived. Beside her sat Blue, tail thumping softly, head leaning into her leg. He was 6 months old now, nearly grown but still carrying the earnest innocence of a pup who believed the world could be good, because someone had helped save it. Sarah's heartbeat quickened as a familiar silhouette emerged from the security corridor. Ethan Miller, broad-shouldered, calm, carrying the same quiet gravity he had possessed the night she first saw him, a shadowed figure in a blizzard, built from resolve and storms. Today he wore simple travel gear, dark tactical pants, a weatherproof jacket, and a bag slung over one powerful shoulder. His black hair was trimmed shorter now, and the stubble along his jaw framed a face that looked carved from stone, but softened at the edges by the faintest warmth. Shadow walked at his heel, posture disciplined, movement smooth. The big dog's silvered muzzle caught the sunlight as he halted in front of Sarah, sitting tall as if reporting for one last assignment. Ethan stopped only a foot away. He didn't smile, not the wide kind, but his gray eyes held something deeper, gentler. "You look stronger," he said, voice low, steady. "You made sure I had the chance to be," Sarah replied. The unspoken truth between them was vast, filled with memories of blinding snow, pounding heartbeats, and the moment Ethan lifted her out of a dying helicopter without knowing her name. They didn't need to speak those memories aloud. After a beat, Ethan placed one large, steady hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm, grounding, reminding her of a night when everything had felt cold enough to kill. "You fought the right fight," he said, "and you survived." It wasn't praise, it wasn't comfort. It was recognition, something she had never received from Dalton or any superior before him. She nodded, throat tightening. "Thank you for everything." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Shadow stepped forward, lowering his head to Blue. The older dog bumped the younger one gently with his nose, a quiet, dignified farewell. Blue responded with a small lick under Shadow's chin, a gesture both respectful and grateful. Sarah's lips curved. "Looks like he's saying goodbye." "Shadow doesn't do goodbyes," Ethan said softly. "He gives orders." That was, "Stay out of trouble." Sarah laughed, a small warm sound that surprised even her. But the moment was brief. A boarding announcement echoed overhead. Ethan adjusted his pack, the movement efficient and practiced. He always carried himself like someone who knew exactly where he needed to go and what he needed to do once he got there. "What's next for you?" Sarah asked. Ethan's eyes rested on her. Steady, unreadable, but kind. "Same as always, go where I'm needed." "And you're needed back with your unit." "Yeah," she exhaled, lifting Blue into her arms as if anchoring herself. "Will I see you again?" His answer was a quiet truth rather than a promise. "The world's smaller than it feels." He gave her one last nod, a soldier's farewell, and turned toward the security gate. Shadow stayed close, matching his stride perfectly, a dark shape moving with purpose through the crowd. Within seconds they were swallowed by the river of passengers, disappearing into the hum of ordinary life. Sarah stood motionless, cradling Blue, feeling the warm weight of him against her chest. The sun spilled across the airport floor, bright and radiant, reflecting off the distant mountains. She stepped outside, Blue wriggling happily in her arms. The horizon burned with a brilliant orange glow, like fire, like rebirth. And standing beneath it, she finally understood. The blizzard had been the test, but the dawn, this dawn, was the reward she had earned with every breath she fought to keep. In the end, this story isn't just about survival, it's about the quiet miracles God sends when we are lost in our darkest storms. Sometimes that miracle is a stranger who shows up at the right moment, a loyal dog who refuses to leave our side, or a spark of courage we didn't know we still had. And just like Sarah found her dawn after the blizzard, may you find strength, protection, and hope in your own everyday battles. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that God is still working in the unseen. Leave a comment so we know you're here with us, and subscribe to join our growing family. May God bless you, guide you, and place a miracle on your path exactly when you need it most.